Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today I wanted to have a chat about the legend that is Bjorn the Fell-Handed, his death, and the how and why his interment within a dreadnought transpired. A spoiler warning to begin here, as today we will be referencing events from the Warhammer 40k story Parting of the Ways by author Chris Wraight. So you have been warned, and with that said, let's waste no time and just jump straight in. Okay, now, for all the legends of the Imperium out there are few names who can compare to Bjorn the Fell-Handed. He has been a name of the Sons of Russ since the days of the mythical heresy, the connection of myth into reality. The sole son of Fenris, who can say, "I was there with Leman Russ. I spoke to the Wolf King." Admittedly, this may have taken a bit of a dent with the now returns of Guilliman and L. Johnson, but to the true Space Wolf fans out there, Bjorn will always be special. And for all the Fell-Handed's mystique and popularity, there are questions abound regarding his past. None more so than why did Russ leave him behind? But also too, how did he come to lead the chapter? Where did he fall? And why did he end up within a dreadnought, when no other former chapter masters out there have? Was it Bjorn's choice, or not? And well, while we may never know for sure why Russ told Bjorn to remain, the questions regarding Bjorn's fate we can answer, as it was actually shown within the audiobook story Parting of the Ways. At the time of the Primarch's departure, Bjorn was actually second in command of the chapter, having been promoted by Russ over even more surviving senior members of the former Legion. The chapter continued to number into a couple of thousand, in outright defiance of Guilliman's codex, and the mighty fortress of the Fang had finally been completed. Russ was one of, if not the last Primarch remaining in the galaxy, and the Imperium was largely celebrating the completion of the scouring. In Bjorn's opinion, foolishly thinking the traitors were defeated for good. It felt like the wolves alone defied the growing corruption around them. However, so it was, the Primarch departed, and a hole was torn in the heart of his sons. And interestingly, the chapter had absolutely no idea where Russ had gone. No trace of the course his ship took was left. So, not necessarily to the Eye of Terror we have always been told. And we don't know exactly how long the great hunts for Russ went on after. But we do know the great companies continued to venture ever further out into the void. Be gone longer, take greater risks. And slowly, bit by bit over the years, the mood of the chapter changed, from a joyous adventure to reunite with the Primarch, with each company seeking to claim the glory for themselves, to a mourning across the chapter, a dawning realization and dread that he may never come back. And the Fell-Handed actually never took part in any of those great hunts, instead remaining within the Fang, wanting to hear the news of Russ's finding as soon as it occurred. And we're told that he was haunted by his Primarch's cold expression in those final moments. The cutting words he spoke to Bjorn, "Not you," leaving Bjorn alone of his personal retinue behind. And eventually, with the continued failures of the great hunts, Bjorn took a ship out for himself, beginning to think that it was only he who could find the Primarch. It's not stated exactly, but it definitely implies that Bjorn may well have ventured to the Eye of Terror, where real space blended with the ether, and he travelled to the very end of the Astronomican's light, but of course all to no avail. And so eventually, after many years, Bjorn gave up, believing that Russ never intended to come home at all. And upon returning to Fenris, Bjorn retreated to Russ's chamber atop the Fang, to be alone in his sorrow. And this is where Bjorn would finally become the new commander of the chapter. I would say Great Wolf, but the wolves didn't actually know what title to use, because they'd only ever had Russ, and there could only ever be one Wolf King. At this point in time, the Wolf Lords of the Great Companies were legitimately considering going their separate ways. The chapter itself was on the very brink of disbanding. And so, whilst brooding within the Primarch's chamber, a young space wolf disturbed Bjorn, named Frayne Winterclaw. Winterclaw was one of the new breed of space wolves who never knew the Legion before, and he refused to leave when Bjorn demanded, arguing that Bjorn needed to stop feeling sorry for himself and take command, telling him the news that the chapter was breaking without his leadership, and that was why Bjorn was left by the Primarch. And the two argued, with Bjorn of course vastly superior. However, in the argument, Bjorn let out his anger at the Primarch for leaving him behind, leaving him to look after the chapter, confronting the ghost of his Primarch and Legion in many ways. And ultimately, Bjorn would relent. He would take up leadership of the chapter. And this is a part of Space Wolf history never really known or spoken of, that Bjorn didn't simply take over, next man up. That actually, without Russ, the chapter was on the very brink of collapsing. That the great companies were splitting away. And it was only then that Bjorn took over, to save the chapter. And for 3 centuries after Russ's departure, Bjorn would lead the rout, the Great Wolf, restoring them to their former glory, and alone having the force of will to rebuke and defy the claws of the Adeptus Terra, attempting to take away the wolves' sovereignty and independence. And if there's a character and time period that's ever calling out for a novel series, it is surely this time with Bjorn the Fell-Handed as the Great Wolf, leading the Space Wolf chapter post-Scouring, uniting them back to past glory and defying the power grabs of the new Imperium, fighting to retain the wolves as the independent executioners. Man, having that written by Chris Wraight as a prequel and follow-on to The Parting of the Ways, that would be beyond awesome. I don't know if it's ever planned, but I really hope so. However, I digress. Of course, the day would come, 3 centuries later, that Bjorn would fall, and it would transpire upon the world of Morellion, against the forces of chaos. Bjorn, as always, charging straight into the enemy before support could arrive. Against the demon of chaos, who had slain 20 of his brothers, would Bjorn give his life, killing the demon with a laugh as he did so. His final words as he lay bleeding out upon the ground: "For Russ." The arriving reinforcements would race to their Great Wolf, witnessing him fall against the demon, and Bjorn's body would be placed in a life support unit as the wolves attempted to bear him back to Fenris. He would be accompanied by an honour guard, led by the now veteran wolf priest Thrain Winterclaw, the same brother who had confronted Bjorn all those centuries earlier, and by Kargrim, a senior rune priest of the chapter. Bjorn was essentially dead. However, Winterclaw defied the laws of progenoid removal in desperation to try and save the Great Wolf. And even with the life support, Bjorn would die twice en route to Fenris, saved only by hours of Winterclaw's efforts upon the operating table. And a great mourning would overtake the chapter. The legendary Fell-Handed had fallen. But still, Winterclaw would continue to operate, refusing to give in, reporting that even if Bjorn still lived, he would lose his legs, his right arm, and his stomach, but that the bleeding simply wouldn't stop. And here, the wolves collectively simply couldn't comprehend losing their great wolf, facing a future without his leadership, which was how the prospect of interment into a dreadnought arose, suggested by rune priest Kargrim. And Winterclaw and Kargrim debated whether the route would serve a leader within a tomb, coming to the conclusion that they would follow him into the eye itself, so long as he still lived, and his soul was intact. And thus it was that Bjorn was raced to the depths of the Fang, to an Iron Priest named Blademaker, a survivor of the old Legion. And it was a risk, as the secrets of dreadnought creation were being lost with every passing year, and the rates of failure were only ever continuing to raise higher. But such was the wolves' desperation, such was Bjorn's importance to the chapter, they decided to take the risk over saving his progenoid glands. And this is incredibly revealing. How Bjorn wasn't simply interred to try and save him, so he could continue to serve. He was actually interred, so he could still lead the chapter, still be the Great Wolf. That the Lords of the chapter actually wanted Bjorn to continue being the Great Wolf, even as a dreadnought. Because the wolves simply didn't know what to do without him. And when you consider how close the chapter had come to breaking without him before, it's no wonder Bjorn the Fell-Handed had legitimately saved the Space Wolves' existence. And this incredible reliance on Bjorn, this integral importance to the chapter, is perhaps exemplified best by the fact that Blademaker had already carved out an immaculate sarcophagus of unmatchable craftsmanship, a work of passion that would never be duplicated. And it was Blademaker who selected the famous Power Claw, clearly having kept it ready for such an occasion. And so it's almost like the entire chapter had the same unconscious thought the entire time, that they would all do whatever they had to preserve Bjorn. And so interred he would be, with Winterclaw, Kargrim and Blademaker as Lords of the chapter, waiting nervously to see if it would work, to see if Bjorn would live, be reborn, which of course he would be. The veil of death would lift, and Bjorn would find himself before the three lords and the assembling chapter, all kneeling before him. Now, how long and did Bjorn continue to lead? Who knows? Those are questions for another day. But if anything, the whole tale of Bjorn in the aftermath of Russ's departure speaks of an incomparable importance, a singular will, identity, that defined his entire chapter. That in many ways really shows that it was the Fell-Handed, and not Russ, who made the Space Wolves the chapter we know and love today. And as always everyone, what do you think? Are you surprised to hear the Space Wolves chapter nearly disbanded in the wake of Russ's departure? That the great companies were perilously close to going their separate ways? Does it surprise you that no other Wolf Lord could step up to unify the chapter? Or was it impossible to compare to the leadership of the Primarch? Was this why that Russ knew he had to leave Bjorn behind? Because he knew Bjorn was the only one who could? And are you surprised by how important Bjorn became to the chapter? That they would even follow his lead as Great Wolf into death? That they would inter him into a dreadnought so long that he could continue to lead them? And when do you think Bjorn gave up leadership of the chapter? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.